Hi everybody and welcome to this webinar, the first in a series of webinars where we're going to look at hybrid learning using G Suite. For people who haven't met me before, my name is Andy Caffrey and I'm going to be presenting this series of webinars over the coming weeks. And I'm joined today by Katie Wells, who's going to be taking us in detail through Google Classroom and talking about how she uses Classroom to deliver hybrid learning to the students in her school. And then also by Dan Fitzpatrick, who's going to take us into Google Meet in a bit more detail and talk about how Meet has enabled them to give synchronous and asynchronous learning in their school. So they're both going to be joining me shortly. So in terms of the content for today, we're going to start off by digging into what is hybrid learning and just some background to the session. And then, as we said, we're going to go through Google Classroom with Katie, talk about how that can be used with Google Meet with Dan. And at the end, we're going to then do a Q&A session. So as we go through today's webinar, if you have specific questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the YouTube chat where you've been discussing so far shapes and food. But if you drop them in the chat, we'll come and answer the questions as we go. So anything you want to ask about how any of the tools are used, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. Okay. So this webinar is part of a series of webinars. You've obviously all found the site and found your way to the video today, but you can register to get access to the calendar with all the webinars in at the link there, bit.ly/GFE UK webinars. And you can also watch the webinars back on the site. So if you've got any, you miss a webinar or there's a particular part today that you want to share with other teachers in your school, feel free to share the site with them so they can access the resource, their learning. We also have a resource site at canopy.click/hybrid. I'll mention this at the end again, but all the resources we're using today, the slides, the information, some of the handouts and pieces are available for you to access through that link. So I'll mention this again as we go through today and when we get to the end, but rather than having to take notes and that you want to use from today's session, take back into your schools and use yourself, you can access at that link there at canopy.click/hybrid. Okay, so that's the background and the setup all sorted. Let's get in and get started then by talking about starting with hybrid learning and what is hybrid learning. We know that back in March, we went through a period, obviously, where schools closed and a lot of schools very quickly moved to online learning, where students weren't in school. And so all the delivery was online rather than traditional face-to-face. And then since September, when schools have come back, we've got into a far more mixed space. And in some ways, a far more difficult space for us to operate, because I would imagine for many people watching on this webinar, you're either in a position where you've got either some students in school and some students isolating at home, which is common in some schools, or in other schools where you've got whole year groups or whole classes at home while other classes are in school. So we're in this sort of very mixed environment now of delivering predominantly some face-to-face teaching, but then with this concept of having some students who aren't in the room with us. So we need to think about how that works. And hybrid learning really is that mixture of face-to-face and online learning. And how best can we manage that? Because potentially that's more difficult than either all online that we were doing back in March, April, May, June, or all face-to-face that we were used to before. So what we really want to focus on in this series is how can we perfect the hybrid learning and how can we use the tools to the best effect without having huge increases in workload. So how can we be smart with the use of Google tools as we go through this period of hybrid teaching? And that's what the focus is around these webinars. Okay, so let's just go through some key pieces. You'll often hear us talk about synchronous and asynchronous learning as we go through the series. Synchronous learning is where we're doing things face-to-face together. So traditional learning in a classroom would be described as synchronous. And those of you watching me now live who are able to comment in the chat, we're doing synchronous learning together. We're all on this call together. We're all learning at the same time, progressing at the same rate. But sometimes, for various reasons, we might choose to do asynchronous learning. And that's where people are accessing the resources at different times. And there might be some people who are watching this video tonight, tomorrow, in a month's time, or found the video on YouTube, who are therefore asynchronously learning from this video by watching it in their own time, moving it around, maybe only watching certain sections. And so controlling their own learning in that respect. And so we need to think about, well, which approach is appropriate for us and our students that we're working with. So let's dig into these two in a little bit more detail. And we'll start by talking about synchronous learning. So as we said, when we do synchronous learning, everybody's learning together. It's very much effectively repeating our traditional sort of classroom environment way of teaching, where we as the teacher are controlling the pace and control of the learning. And there can be some advantages to using this method of learning. Firstly, we can all follow the same timetable. So if you've got students and you've got you're in particularly secondary school and you're working through different hours, different lessons, if we're delivering synchronous learning online or face-to-face, we can follow that same timetable and keep everyone on the same rota. Secondly, students can connect with each other. When we're in the room together, learning is a social activity, and you can ask a question to the person next to you. And if we're online learning together, we have that option, don't we, to ask questions and get feedback, and it's a far more responsive piece of learning. And so as a teacher, we can respond and react to what our learners need. And most of us who've been teaching will have had a lesson that you've started where you've thought it's going in one direction, and then a student's asked a really valid question, or maybe as an uncovered a misunderstanding that students have got. And so you as a skillful practitioner have taken the lesson in a different direction. And obviously synchronous learning allows us to do that, allows us to read the room, to look at the chat, to decide where things are going, and to decide what route to take. And so, well, that's one of the advantages of synchronous learning, if we can try and achieve that. But that's not always possible, and we need to think of the considerations of our students. And so big things to think about. Oh, I forgot to mention, synchronous could also reduce workload because we're doing things in real time. So we're delivering our lesson both online and to our class at the same time. And we'll talk about that a bit more with Dan when we look at Google Meet. But in terms of considerations, we need to think about, well, is this possible? Can all our students access lessons in real time? And you would know your students and the resources that they have, and many schools have done surveys or have provided access to resources and access to Wi-Fi. So think about the equity of what you're asking students to deliver. If you're working at a school that's one-to-one devices, that's giving everybody a device and has gone and surveyed the Wi-Fi and provided additional Wi-Fi support for students without, it might be perfectly valid to say to your students, given that we've given you all this stuff, please join me at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning for my geography lesson. But if you know that that isn't the case with your students, then maybe there'll be some issues with access of equity to synchronous learning. And then also, if we're working with synchronous learning, maybe we're streaming out of our classroom, how can we ensure that our students who are online can get the same experience as our students who may be in the room if we're going to try and do both at the same time? So imagine the situation where we've got a Google Meet running, and we've got our from our lesson, so we're standing in our classroom delivering. How is it the students on the Meet can interact? How do they ask questions? How do they communicate with what's going on in the room? How do we make sure the students in the room aren't dominating maybe what's going on to the detriment of the students joining us online? So those are some considerations that we need to think about if we're going to use synchronous live real-time learning as a route of delivery. And Dan will address some of this, and Katie will as they come up in the next section. The alternative, of course, is to deliver asynchronous learning. So we're going to provide resources and we're going to provide materials, probably through Google Classroom, for our learners to learn at their own pace and in their own, almost take their own route perhaps through the learning. So asynchronous learning means that students are learning at their own pace. It means that maybe students can be given more choice. Certainly as someone who was teaching geography, we would often do project work. If I'm teaching natural hazards, I might give the students the choice of, do you want to study earthquakes or volcanoes or tsunamis? And so the learner is getting a lot more choice in that because they're choosing their own route through, maybe with their own topics within the work. So sometimes with asynchronous learning, we can give more autonomy over to the student to really focus on the things they're interested in. But we also need to think about how we're going to plan this. So the considerations for us when we think about asynchronous learning is how do we plan and structure that? If we've got students who are at home and students in the classroom, how do we structure that pace to keep them moving at a similar pace? And also, how do we help students who get stuck? Because there again, it's that issue of equity. If you have got a student who's isolating at home and you get halfway through the work and you're stuck and you don't know what to do, how do you ask for help? And so we've seen some schools where they've used open office hours in Google Meet, where a teacher will be on Google Meet, the student can pop in and ask a question. Can they message you in the stream in Google Classroom? Can they leave a comment and tag you in on the side of the work in Google Docs? Lots of different ways, but what is the process for a student who is asynchronously learning and they get stuck? So that's some of the considerations we need to think about if we're going to use this with our students. And also, can this method be isolating for students? If we just sent work home in Google Classroom day after day, it was predominantly sort of, Google Docs, sort of standard, perhaps worksheet type work. Where's the level of interaction in that? Can we build in some social communication? And as we go through this series of webinars, we're really going to explore that in a lot more detail. And one of the webinars coming up really focuses on how do we create genuine teamwork while we're delivering in a hybrid environment between students in the classroom and students at home. So we're going to address that within this series of webinars as well. But these are some of the things we need to consider as we dig into the topic of hybrid learning. And so we're going to hand over now to Katie, and she's going to talk us a little bit through how she's using Google Classroom with her students, and particularly around hybrid learning. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
So we'll give you a moment just to share your screen in.
There we are. I'm all in. Okay, so I've got a few examples today of using Google Classroom to conquer this whole hybrid learning that we've got going on at the moment. So I have 15 children in my classroom, and I think I've only had all 15 of them in my classroom for the last 2 weeks. We're now on half term, so I've had to do lots of juggling of setting work for children that were at home, some because they were isolating, some because they were at home waiting test results and things. So we've had this children in the classroom, children not in the classroom, but still learning at home scenario going on for a while. So just in my little demo classroom here, I would say one of the first things I've learned through using all of this is keep your Google Classroom organized. So my first point here is to create topics. I've got an example here of my history class, my history lessons. We're doing castles. So we've got a nice topic here with a little emoji. You can tell I teach primary school, just to keep them interested. And that's very easily done under the Create Topic tab. If I was to make one for my geography, we're doing rainforests. So I can add that in there and add the topic in. So then I know that my class, when they come on, they can go to that classwork tab and everything is neatly organized into their topics, their different subjects, so they can see where they've got to go really easily. For the emojis, there's lots of different ways of getting them. The way that I use is emojipedia.org, and you can search for whatever emoji you want, and it's a simple case of copying it and pasting it over. So that is the different topics. The other thing is I've learned over time as well, if I name the assignments rather than giving the assignments a name, I was naming them by date. So for example, if this was what my class were doing today, it's called Tuesday the 20th. And we had lots of questions during the first lockdown period of summer term of parents not knowing, or how could the children know if it was going to be a synchronous lesson with a Google Meet with the teacher, or if it wasn't going to be. So we developed this way of labeling our lessons with, you have to come to this one at the time that is on the timetable because we are going to have a Google Meet. And then again, we included a little video camera for those that may not have understood. And here's an example of a synchronous lesson. So this one is if the children were to watch this particular link about Mott and Bailey castles first, then have some form of input from me by joining a Google Meet if they weren't in the classroom, and then there was an activity. Now, obviously, if the children are in the classroom with me, they can have the Google Meet in the classroom. They don't have to join a Google Meet link. They can just have me teaching like normal. Whereas the children at home, they could dial in on the Google Meet link that comes within Classroom that Dan is going to show you later. And they could learn at the same time that all the other children were having the input as well. And then the activity was a Google Jamboard, and that all the children could do this together, be they in the classroom on our Chromebooks or at home on their Chromebooks. So that was a way of doing that synchronous lesson in that instance. Another example is, as we said, if it was an asynchronous lesson. So we may have some children in the classroom, some at home again. So if we were going to plan ahead for our next assignment, so say this was for Tuesday, the 27th, and now we said that this one is not going to have a Google Meet. So we would say no Meet. And then let me just copy and paste the blurb over for the instructions for this one. So the idea of this lesson would be that there would be some form of input. In this case, it is going to be a slide deck. So I'm going to include the slide deck. Now, obviously, the children in the classroom could have this slide deck for real, with me doing the input in the classroom with them. Whereas the children at home could go through the slide deck themselves. So if we include this, so the children that are at home, I want them to be able to view this file so that they could teach themselves about the different types of castle and things. And then I would create them a template of them selling their castle, but I obviously want each of those to get a copy of that template. So I'm going to make a copy for each student. So the children at home are going to have the same lesson as the children in the classroom, just they may not have the input from me at this particular time. So this one would be asynchronous. But what we did have going at the same time was an open Google Meet link in certain hours that we called help hours, that they could come, I think it was between like 3 and 4, and they could come and ask questions about that lesson you did earlier in the day. So I always used to put a note about that I would be on the Google Meet link in the help hours for any questions. So when Andy said earlier, how can we still help those children at home who may have questions, that is an instance of we were helping them later on in the day. Now, I may not want this one to go out straight away, so I'm going to save it as a draft. I am also going to make sure that I'm going to put it in the right topic. So put it in that histories one. So for now, I'm just going to save this as a draft because it's for later on next week. The third example I was going to show was, say we did this lesson and a child is at home but couldn't attend that certain time that we did the lesson, if it was 10 o'clock this morning. So we realized that a student was missing. What we always made sure that we did was that we recorded the Google Meets so that they could watch it later on. So for instance, here I've got recording. Hello, as you missed today's lesson, here is the link and the work. So they've still got the link to the Jamboards. And then I'm just going to show an example of adding from my Google Drive the recording of the Google Meet. So if there's a folder that gets created called Meet Recordings, and I can add that video. And then because it wasn't all the children that missed this lesson, I only realized it was child number 1 that missed the lesson. I'm only going to send it to child number 1. So then I would post it and it would go out to just that child, and it would show that they have seen that they can catch up on the lesson. They can watch the link that was on the initial lesson plan there, and then they can watch my input and they can still do the task and then hand it in at the end. So there was lots of different ways there that we included the children that were at home in the lessons that were happening. As we've said, some were synchronous, some were asynchronous. The other thing that we used was our class stream. And I would say that it's really important to customize your class stream with things that you want. As you can see on the settings at the moment, it posts any time I put a link out or an assignment out. Here, under the settings, you can change the settings for that. What it shows at the moment are condensed notifications. There is a way of making it show all the attachments and details. Now, we found this really handy for particularly our younger children, Key Stage 1 children that we use in Google Classroom at home, because it meant that there was just less clicking. They didn't have to go into classwork. They could just come straight onto the classroom and see all the details about the assignments they had been set on their stream. On the flip side, you could also, with for instance, my year 6 students, I actually hid the notifications from the classwork stream. And that encouraged them to go into the classwork to actually find their classwork. And it just kept the stream open for them to have that communication. So if there were any questions, they could share, they could ask the question there and other children could comment on it. Again, if you don't, that's if you have the students can post and comment on. For some of the younger ones and different classrooms, we actually turned that off, just so that they were being silly in the stream. So yeah, I've shown you the different ways of using the examples in the classroom. And then I think Dan is possibly going to show you how to do the Google Meets bit. See there?
Hello.
Katie, thank you for taking us through Classroom. Just a couple of quick questions, and feel free, by the way, anyone that's watching, if you want to put questions in the chat as we go, either on what Katie said about Classroom. There's already a question about Meet, but we'll do that one after the Meet section, and we'll jump to the questions at the end. But feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go. I was just going to ask a couple of quick questions that went through my mind. So obviously, Katie, you're working with primary school students. So out of interest, are you working, because this is a big debate at primary, is it one Google Classroom with all the subjects in, or multiple classrooms for each topic? And which way around have you got that organised?
So we have, with our Key Stage 1 children, our Key Stage 1 children just have one classroom for everything that is taught by that teacher. So if I teach them English, maths, history, science, geography, they were all on one classroom in the different topics, but then they may have on their little dashboard a different classroom for French, because they know that I don't teach them French. They know that another teacher teaches them for French, so they would have a French classroom. Whereas our older children, Key Stage 2, they have different teachers for every subject, so they have different classrooms all the way through. But then we did organise it so that we also had a year group classroom, so like a year 5 classroom, a year 6 classroom, that lots of teachers would put things on. And then we also do have a whole school classroom that's used primarily by the headmistress to put out assemblies and things.
So a whole range of uses of Classroom there. One thing, the other thing I would mention for people who are using Classroom is think about the repetition of work across your different teachers. So what we see in a lot of schools, particularly our larger schools, is they'll create a master classroom. So whether that's a primary, like a year 1, year 2, year 3 master classroom, or in secondary, geography year 7 classroom, and they'll then put all the teachers on that classroom as co-teachers, so everyone can access it as a teacher, but no actual students in there. And then what that means is that when we use Google Classroom, we can reuse posts from that classroom into our own classes. So effectively, we're sharing that workload of writing those assignments. So if Katie's created a great assignment there for history that I want to just reuse, she's attached all the resources, I simply need to go to Classroom, reuse post, and then I can pick that post up and assign it to my class. So I think with some careful planning, think about the workload of staff, because otherwise in some schools I do see lots of repetition of things. So think about how that's going to work in terms of creating that master classroom. So hopefully some tips there around Classroom. I'm just trying to see if any of the questions in there, or they're all Google Meet questions coming in. Yeah. I think they're all Google Meet, so we'll save them for the end of Dan's. So Dan is going to come on and join us now and talk to us about using Google Meet. Hi, Dan.
Hello, it's good to be with you. Yeah, so it's kind of what a I don't know, is it exciting? Is it turmoil? What's going on in education at the moment? But what I do know is that a lot of exciting practices are coming out of what's going on at the moment. And myself, I'm a senior leader in a secondary school in the northeast of England, if you can't tell already by my accent. And what a time of experimentation it's been, and kind of really honing in on our practice in the classroom, especially in a hybrid way. And I guess Andy's already picked up on this, and Katie mentioned it in terms of workload. We really thought that coming out of lockdown back into the classroom, we really wanted to keep a lot of those things that we'd learned during lockdown going. So we'd skilled up all of our teachers, and all of our students, and we wanted to keep that going. And one way that we did that was for students who were unfortunately going to have to stay at home during that time. Okay, so we knew that we had to provide them with a provision, with education that was just as good as the students in class were getting. So I'm going to take you through some of the ways that we've done that, and we're still fine tuning this, but we've stumbled across and learned and taught ourselves and collaborated with other schools and come up with some ways that are working for us and are working for our students. So just to kind of pick up from where Katie left off, I'm in the classroom here. So I've just mocked this classroom up. So this is, I'm a business studies teacher, as well as a few other subjects. So I've just mocked up a business studies classroom here. So one way to get the Google Meet link is actually integrated in the classroom. Over the last few months, we've been so lucky that there's so many features starting to come out in Google Meet, and I'm going to mention some of those new features that can really be taken advantage of to excel hybrid learning. And one of them is creating the Google Meet within the Google Classroom, and I think that's so important because students sometimes they just want it. They just want the links, they want the resources. And they don't have to go off and search for things. It's just all integrated in this classroom. So I'm thinking here kind of teacher in front of a classroom and teaching their lesson, but then some students who aren't in, accessing the lesson from home. And how to do that so that the teacher isn't essentially creating two lots of work and then workload is just too much, which I'm sure a lot of us are kind of struggling with at the moment. So one way to do it is to let the students at home see and take part in the live lesson that's going on in the classroom. How can that be done? It could be done various ways, but for the case of simplicity, I'm going to kind of aim this session today on simply a teacher who's opened up a Chromebook, put it on the desk, or put it with a student in the lesson, and has the camera on them, and then is in a meet, and the students at home are accessing that meet and watching what's going on in the classroom. Okay, there are various other ways that you can do that. So if you're lucky enough to have a Jamboard in your classroom, you could do it through that way and through various other bits of technology. But I'm just going to take the simple scenario of Chromebook at the front of the classroom, and students watching and taking part through a meet. So I'm going to go into some of the features and let's have a look. It's to see how to maximize that. How can we get good teaching into that? Because that's what we're all about, isn't it? So creating the Google Meet so that students at home can quickly access it. I'm sure some of you will already be familiar with this, but in the Google Classroom here, just at the top where it says Meet Link, You can see there it says generate meet link. So I'm just going to click that. Then I'm going to click generate meet link. And that's going to create a link for our Business Studies Year 10 Google Classroom, Google Meet. And you can see there it's toggled on to visible for students. I can easily toggle that on and off. And I'm going to click save. And then you'll see at the top there, it's come up with the link. And I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that. Just at the top there, there's the link. And because it was toggled on to visible for students, students can come in, and if they're prepared for there to be a link at the top, they can see that and access it. I'm just going to quickly show you in the settings cog in the top right-hand corner here. If I click that and scroll down to where it says meet, I can then change up some of the settings if I need to. So I can turn the visibility for students off if I don't want them to go in there when I'm not there and the lesson's not happening. I can also copy the link or reset the link there. So I'm going to come out of settings. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the meet link. And that's going to open in a meet window. And there we are. Okay, I'm going to click join and enter the meet. So I'm in the meeting, so I'd do this just as kind of a few minutes before the lesson starting. I would set it up with the Chromebook on the desk, facing the front, and have the students be able to come in and check that they're all in there. I'm going to take you through now some of the features which I think will help make this a better experience. And when I say a better experience, I'm thinking of how's it going to help them with accessibility, how's it going to help engage them, and how also are we going to make different forms of assessment available within this hybrid model. So the first thing I'm going to show you is simply just presenting the screen. So if the Chromebook, for example, is set up at the front of the classroom and it's pointing at the teacher and the screen's behind the teacher, it might not be the best visibility. So what we can do is we can share whatever we are putting on the screen for the students who are actually in the classroom. We can share that with our students. So we simply do that by, in the bottom right-hand corner, clicking present now. And I will zoom in again so you can see that a bit clearer. I can choose to present the entire screen, a window, or a Chrome tab. I think what's probably going to be best in this scenario that we're talking about is a Chrome tab, because we just want students to be able to see the Google slides that we're putting on the screen for the other students. And that's also going to work really well if we've got video, an animation, or audio. Okay, so if you are shown a video within your slides and you want the students at home to be able to hear it so they can have that similar experience to the students in the classroom, then choose the Chrome tab and they will be able to hear that audio as well. Choose the window or the entire screen, and that's not going to happen. So make sure we click that Chrome tab to present. And I guess, why is that important? That's important so that students at home aren't missing out. They're not missing a beat when it comes to whatever content you're sharing with the students in the classroom. And like Andy said before, it's about that equity, isn't it? It's about making sure the students at home have the same opportunities and have the same accessibility to what's going on and to education as students who are in the classroom. So that's one way to do it, presenting the screen. Another way, I'm just going to show you a few little neat tricks. And this one's quite a new feature in Google Meet. And I think a lot of people I speak to haven't yet discovered this feature. But if you click on the three dots at the bottom right-hand corner, which is the more options button, and if you go to settings, and you can see here the noise cancellation feature. Okay, so it's toggled off at the minute. If I toggle that on, what that will do is a bit of technology in the background will kick in, and it will focus the sound on the person who's speaking, so the teacher. Okay, so what that means is, because you've got students at home tuning into a lesson that's happening in a room, and they're also going to hear kind of all those background noises, you know, paper shuffling, the chairs squeaking on the ground, students just moving. And this is really going to help to limit that, so that the students at home can focus on the teacher's voice and can focus on what's going on in the lesson. Really helpful for those students who get distracted easily and who need that extra focus as well. So I think that's an amazing feature that's going to help in this type of hybrid scenario. Also, along with that, a feature that I'm sure a lot of you, if you're using Meet, will also be familiar with is the captions. Okay, so I'm going to turn just at the bottom here where it says turn on closed captions. So once closed captions are switched on, what will happen is that the speech from what's going on and what the teacher's saying will appear. And I've just noticed it's not appearing, and I think I know why. I'm going to go into settings and I'm just going to change my microphone to the microphone I'm actually using. That will probably help, Dan. Then I'm going to come out here, and there we go. You can see that what I'm saying is appearing as text on the screen. An amazing feature for accessibility. That Google have created this machine learning technology that runs in the background, listens to what's being said, and then puts it on the screen. So again, those students at home who maybe find it difficult focusing, who need that extra input when it comes to listening and to hearing new content, that is going to be an invaluable feature. That also is integrated into Google Slides. So for students in the classroom who would also benefit from that, Google Slides on the screen in the classroom, that would be amazing for those students too. I'm going to switch that off. A few more things. I want to move on to some kind of interactivity tools. And if you notice, just in the top here, we've got this icon. Okay, so this icon, we've got a triangle, a square, and a circle. And we were having a bit of a debate last night about what's this icon called. If I hover over it, it says activities. So I guess that's the official term for that button. But we like a good nickname for a Google button. And I vote for the shape sorter. So let's get that trending. Let's make that icon officially the shape sorter. If I click that, then you will see here I've got a few new features. Now, some of these features are available in Google Enterprise for Education and some available in Google for Education. So I'm not going to go into breakout rooms in this session, but you'll not see breakout rooms or some of the other options unless you have the Enterprise features. But I'm going to show you just why some of these are really invaluable for this hybrid situation. So we've got polls. So if I click on polls, what that allows me to do is to essentially ask a multiple choice question. So in my school, what we do is when we teach a new bit of content, we also introduce a hinge question. If you're not familiar with a hinge question will test whether the students have understood that new bit of knowledge. And then if they have understood it, we can carry on with kind of the normal play of the lesson onto whatever's next. If they haven't, then the teacher will kind of reorientate the lesson and reteach the bit of content or teach it in a new way. So that hinge question, all important for learning. This is a nice way. So if there's going to be a hinge question in the class, then this is a really nice way to ask those students at home to a hinge question so you can gauge their reaction. This really helping engagement in the lesson. So the students at home don't think that they're watching it on a screen, like almost like it's a television program, and they don't have to engage. But this pulls them in, it makes them a part of the lesson. And an amazing feature of this also is that you can pre-prepare these questions. So this is not something you're going to have to in the class be quickly typing out a question. You can pre-prepare these questions and then post them when you need to. You've also got the Q&A feature, which is new. If I click that, if I click turn on Q&A, there's nobody else in this meet with me, so there's not going to be any questions come in, but you can see, in fact, I can ask a question here. So if I ask that question, and then other students will be able to say that. So if a student at home types that question in, other students at home will be able to say that, and they can also upvote the question. So that's a really nice feature to say which questions are the ones that kind of urgently need to be answered, or the questions that the students have the most interest in. So if you've got more students upvoting a question, then the likelihood is you probably want to go to that one first and address that one. So a really nice feature there of Q&A that can really help bring students in, engage them into the lesson, and then that polls feature to be able to have some kind of assessment in there as well, on the go, especially great for those hinge questions. Okay, let me show you one other enterprise feature which I'm finding invaluable at the moment. That's because once I'm in a lesson, and I'm aware with it, and if you're like me, I get to the end of the lesson and sometimes, don't tell anyone this, but sometimes I haven't done the register, and I need to quickly complete the register because I've just gotten too excited in the lesson. What Google Meet does with Enterprise is it will send you, after the meeting, it will send you the attendance records for that meet. So it also gives you the time they came in, the time that they left. So if you have a student who just popped in for 5 minutes, you will see that they stayed in for the whole lesson. It will tell you that as well, and that could be because this student is studying from home because they've got a doctor's appointment, or they've got to go out for a test, or something like that relates to the unfortunate circumstances that we're in at the moment. But that will allow you to see who's attended, and then you can follow up on that. And like Katie was saying earlier, when she shared that she records her Google Meets, which I think is amazing. And even in this live scenario, I would really encourage to record. So 3 dots in the bottom right hand corner again, and just the third option from the top, record the meeting. What will happen then is you will get an email straight afterwards with that recording, and you can then put that into your Google Classroom for those students who couldn't make it, or those students who could only come in for a certain amount of time. So allowing that asynchronous side of the lesson. And I think I just want to emphasize the workload again. So this isn't a teacher having to create a video and then having to teach the lesson as well. You can create the video, you can create the content while teaching the lesson, dramatically reducing any extra workload. And then think of the possibilities for that. So what we're doing at my school is we're encouraging staff to take those videos, put them onto their school YouTube channels unlisted, create playlists out of them, and then when it comes to the assessment times within the year in terms of revision, and for students who are doing exams, then they can use them as revision. So an invaluable resource there. Let me show you one other feature which I think, if this is used well, could revolutionize hybrid learning in the scenario we're talking about. And I don't say that lightly neither. And that's the ability to add a Jamboard into Google Meet. Okay, click again at the bottom, and I'm going to go up to where it says whiteboard, open a Jam. So if you're not familiar with Jamboard, it's a bit of hardware. It's a large screen that can be used in a classroom scenario, where it is essentially an electronic version of a whiteboard, but that's the very minimum it is. There's so much you can do with it in terms of collaboration, and everyone working on it, and then integrating the Google Meet into it. But you can also create a Jam, which is the file type for a Jamboard. And I'm going to open one now and show you it. So if I click open a Jam, and I can choose one that's pre-prepared. So if I want to put a template one in there that I want students to work in, I can pre-prepare that and then open it. Or I can just start a new one, and I'm going to click that, and it says creating a Jam. And you can see here that it is created a blank Jam file. I'm going to go back over to the Google Meet, and I just want to show you, because what it does is, and it's just jumped in there, in the attachments, so the bottom left-hand corner, in the attachments for this Meet, if I click that, there is the Jamboard file. So direct your students to the Jamboard file within the attachments. They click that and they can open it. And all the great things you can do within a Jamboard. So you can add sticky notes. you can add images, you can add text, lots of things you can do in that. But where it comes into its own is that students can collaborate on this. So if you allow students to be able to edit this jam, and when you first create it, it's just the teacher who can edit it. But if you share it with the students and allow them to edit it, what you will have is students at home being able to contribute to this jam. If your students in the classroom have a Chromebook, they can contribute to the jam. And then you as a teacher can also contribute to that jam. And you've got a full synthesis of collaboration going on. It's almost seamless as well. Students at home, teacher and students in the classroom working together on this whiteboard. And a great feature for something like a starter activity, where you want students to put lots of stuff on the jam about what they maybe learned last lesson, as a way to start the lesson, or all the other possibilities that I'm sure you could imagine from using this in a hybrid scenario. And I think I've kind of mentioned most of the tools that can be used to maximize the hybrid scenario within Google Meet. Just to point you as a last thing, just to point you to this new icon. If you're used to Meet, you'll know this is a new icon here in the bottom left, which is controls. So you've got some extra controls in there for security. So you can, sometimes you want students to have that maximum engagement. So you might want them to share their screen or to use the chat within Google Meet. And sometimes you don't, because you want them to be focused on something else. This is a great way to be able to do that and have control over that. Everything I've mentioned is so the link that went out onto the YouTube live chat will take you to this website here. And if you scroll down just to this slide deck here, which says hybrid teaching using Meet. So everything I've mentioned is within that slide deck, and there's also loads more application and why we do it, in a few more links to the pedagogy behind that. Thank you very much.
Dan, thank you very much. Great to get some more detail there on Google Meet and some of the uses, and certainly even for those of us that have been using it a while, as a lot of people have seen, the number of new features rolling out into Google Meet to help it support educators better. A lot of feature requests going into Google Meet at the start of lockdown, and we're seeing those sort of features come out now and roll out into the product. So that's been great to see. So thank you for taking us through that. I know Katie's probably going to come back in and join us as well, and we're going to answer some questions that have come up in the chat, and there've been a few. It's always great in the chat for me to see questions come up, and then before we even get the chance to bring it up on screen, other people in the chat go up and answer it. So great that you're assisting each other with the learning today that's going on in chat. But let's just have a look at some of the questions that have come in. So we'll bring some up on the screen just to answer. We had a question earlier on about Google Meet and parents. It was quite a bit a while ago. Someone who posted it in, I think they said it's for later on to answer at the end. I'm just trying to scroll back to get to it. But the question there was around having external people come into Google Meet. And so just to explain there, a change that happened. Google Meet originally could be accessed by anybody, but Google made a change so that for education domains, there's the question, non-Google email addresses aren't able to access Meet links anymore. And so that change was made. So previously they could, and that change was rolled out in the summer. And Katie, I know you've run parents' evenings through Google Meet more recently, haven't you?
Yeah, last week we did our parents' evenings through Google Meet. We did appointment slots through Google Calendar, and the parents booked a slot. Each slot obviously auto-generates the Google Meet link. And we opened a ticket with Google to see if we could allow non-Gmail users to attend it.
Yeah, so because Google have turned it off centrally for education domains, if you think you need people outside of your outside of having a Google account coming into your Google Meets, you can your admin person, somebody who has access to the Google Admin Console, can go in there, contact Google support, and open a ticket, as Katie said, to have that unlocked for your domain. So there's obviously reasons why it was locked down, stop people jumping into Meet calls, but if you want that unlocked for them like a parents' evening, that can be requested through the support ticket system. So feel free to talk to your domain administrator if it's not you. and then go and get that unlocked. Still possible to access with that unlocked. So that's answered that question. I think we had a question about monitoring monitoring the use of Google. It came in a while ago. The questions are all rolling down a bit fast now. And the question was, trying to find it in my chat, about how do we know, how do we know who's using what? How do we know how much people are using Google within the school? I think that's what the question was aiming for. So a few different ways of finding out the usage of G Suite and Google in your school. The first one is that there are some basic statistic reports that are available in the admin console. So if you have access to the admin console, you can look at things like the number of live 7-day classes, the number of Google Meet calls created, and get the data on those Meet calls. So there is that sort of reporting into the admin console. And obviously, I was previously an assistant head teacher in a school. I knew how many classes we had. So I could then look at the number of live active Google classes and say, is that a similar number? Am I seeing that? Is that match there? So at a basic level, there's the stuff within the admin report. At another level, Google have something called the transformation reports, and they're available in certain regions of the world, including the UK. And so if you Google search the Google for Education transformation reports, and that is a more detailed report that takes place on your domain, looks at the usage and measures the usage across a number of different areas. So you could go into find that. I'll grab a link, and actually I'll put a link on our resource site to that for you to access later. But the Google for Education transformation reports might be another solution to measuring the use as well. So that's probably worth a look. Transformation reports can only be accessed by domain super administrators. So you need to be an admin to turn that on, because you're going to be extracting data about your domain. So that's that question answered. I'm trying to think whether any other big questions. I think the other thing I'll probably want to mention, I don't know if anyone's asked this, is around as Dan went through his section, he talked about enterprise for education features and normal features. So there are some features that are labeled as enterprise for education features, and that's a paid level of subscription that Google offers. So Google for Education is a free platform and always will be free. But then on top, some additional features, some of the more business features sit under enterprise for education. And so in terms of how do you get information about that, the Google for Education website has a real breakdown of the comparisons between the different features, and then it gives you more information about how that would work. Obviously, I'm aware, so we've got a global range of people on this call, so how the costings might work where you work in your area. So worth checking out if you think the additional features are worthwhile. And then I think we had a question a bit earlier as well, just one final one I'll answer, about recording in Google Meet. So as people know, during lockdown, Google gifted some of the premium features to schools, and one of those features was recording in Google Meet. And then that sort of free period ended at the end of September. But right now, everybody can still record in Google Meet. Google are going to be producing a new temporary recording tool. So you'll still be able to record, but the recording will only be held for a short amount of time, probably about a month. That recording tool, that temporary recording tool, hasn't come out yet. So until that does, everybody can record as normal. When that comes out, you can still record, but obviously not hold the recording forever if you're on the free account, not the enterprise account. So that's going to be one of the differences taking place. And I saw a bit of conversation around that in chat earlier. I think that probably takes us through the bulk of the questions, unless Dan or Katie, you've sent any other questions.
I was just looking through. I can't believe I've been outvoted on the Mr. Men icon. What?
I think it definitely needs a name, our new triangle, square, circle icon in Google Meet, because we don't have a name for it yet. I like the name Mr. Men, so maybe that suits me. Yeah. So just want to wrap up. Do you want to? I'll share my screen back in, just to finish off. Just to mention a few things. So as we've talked about throughout this call, all the resources from the webinar today are available at canopy.click/hybrid. So anything we've mentioned, Dan's slides about using Google Meet, if you're going to do some Meet training with your staff, the actual slides from today, all those resources are available over on the website there at that link. And as we go through this series of webinars, we're going to keep putting resources onto the same place for you to access. And as we said, this is just the first in a series of weekly webinars. On Tuesdays at 3:30, you can join us here on the Google for Education channel as we go through a series of relevant hybrid learning topics, hearing from a range of trainers that work in schools about how they're using the tools within the situation of hybrid learning. So a range of different topics coming up in coming weeks. Otherwise, I just need to thank Dan and Katie for, I also forgot to mention, we also have a Teach From Anywhere site, previously called Teach From Home, but now, of course, we could be teaching from anywhere, the classroom, our house, wherever we may be, Google gives us the power to do that. So it's another site worth visiting. Finally, I get to then thank Dan and Katie for joining us today and sharing some of the practice from where they work. If you're watching today, feel free to join us next week. Thank you all for joining us. We have a link which we'll pop in the chat for feedback. If you want to give us any feedback on today's webinar, feel free to jump onto our Google form and add some feedback in. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Dan. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.